السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى جل جلاله وعم نواله، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا الحبيب المصطفى وعلى آله وأصحابه نجوم الهدى قالت التقى. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد: وبشر الصابرين. صدق الله العظيم. My respected elders, brothers, mothers and sisters, continuing our discussion on the two qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, that Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam mentioned in a hadith, which are beneficial for a believer. And that is the quality of gratitude, shukr, and the quality of patience and sabr. And we were discussing that there are three categories or three different ways a person can express patience and can exercise patience. One being patient upon tragedies and musibah and disasters, calamities, situations. And number two, the ulama, the scholars mention that there is another type of sabr, a category of patience, and that is sabr anil ma'asiyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made you and I a human being, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept certain desires naturally within this creature of human being that you and I are. So it is only natural for you and I to be inclined towards certain actions, certain desires, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden for you and I though. So there's a bottom line Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept. And that line is, this is what's permissible for you, this is what's impermissible or forbidden for you. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept the desire in you and I to go towards and to be attracted towards that which is beyond the boundary. Yusuf ala nabiyina alayhi salatu wasalam says in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes him. The ulama differ as to whose statement this is. One opinion, and perhaps the more correct opinion, is that this is a statement of Yusuf ala nabiyina alayhi salatu wasalam. And he says, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. And this is a prime example, a very profound example, a perfect example of a person who is exercising patience when it comes to the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where a person desires and feels like getting involved in the action, but then remembers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden this and he or she refrains. And the incident is that, and the story of that is of Yusuf ala nabiyina alayhi salatu wasalam. The story of Yusuf alayhi salam is not strange to us. We are familiar with the story of Yusuf ala nabiyina alayhi salatu wasalam. But one particular point, and there came a point in his life where Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam was under the wrath of his brothers. The brothers were jealous. They somehow, in a way, I guess you can say in our language, they kidnapped him, secretly took him, or they took him with a permission, but with a secret plan. And they left Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam in the well, and they returned. Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam is taken out from the well. He's taken to a foreign land. He's sold. He's living as a slave. All these scenarios, all these situations, challenges upon challenges. And now comes a time in his life where he's a young adult. He is handsome and he is fit, he is healthy, and he has the natural desires that any human would have. And now he is being invited by one of the most beautiful women of the time, Imratul Aziz, the queen of her time. And she is inviting him towards the vice and towards the sin. You and I can just imagine the situation that Yusuf ala nabiyina alayhi salatu wasalam is in or was in. How difficult it must have been for this individual. But he was divinely protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he is taken out of jail and his innocence is proven, then he addresses the people and he says, listen very carefully, and he says, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. I don't claim to be innocent. He says, I don't claim that my nafs is free from sin and the desire of sin. إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. The nafs and the inner desire of an individual will absolutely lead a person towards the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. Except there are those servants of Allah whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has divinely protected, and through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you and I are also protected from this disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the nafs is one that desires the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now how do you and I refrain from this? And how do you and I exercise patience? Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam mentions that the Jannah and paradise is surrounded by things bil makarih, by things that a person does not desire to do. And inshallah we will discuss that next week. But then Jahannam and hell is surrounded by shahawat, by desires. And when a person goes towards these shahawat, then this person eventually, or Allah forbid, but the end result may be that this person ends up in hellfire. And the ulama and the scholars, they explain this very beautifully. They say, when a person disobeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world, there is a temporary false pleasure that this person experiences. It's temporary and it's fake. It's apparent. It's an apparent pleasure. But inside, this will leave a person empty. Inside, this will leave a person with regret once he or she turns back and becomes conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala once again. This will leave a person down, depressed and upset, and with remorse and with regret. So the scholars, they mention and they explain that when a person does sin in this world and fulfills the inner desire of an individual, it is as if you are eating a delicious meal, but that meal is contaminated or there's poison mixed into that meal. So you enjoy the meal and you feel like you are having the time of your life, and you eat it and you enjoy it, and after you finish as well you feel content that you've had a nice meal. But slowly the poison catches up and it develops you, it takes over you. So the scholars mention that when a person gets himself or herself involved in sin in this dunya, in this world, you will have a temporary pleasure. You will enjoy it temporarily, perhaps. But it is like the poison in your body that slowly will creep in and will overtake you and overpower you. And this can only lead to one result. And that is, when you have poison, it leads you towards death, a apparent death in the world. And when it comes to sins, it leads to a spiritual death. This poison will lead you and I to a spiritual death. And then we will become completely oblivious of the being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the rights that we owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allama ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah was a great scholar, and he mentions 10 tips on how a person can refrain from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And out of the 10, inshallah, I'll share 2 or 3 of them today, inshallah. Number 1, first and foremost, Allama ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions that for a person to refrain and to be patient and to abstain from sin is to realize and acknowledge that the action that you and I are doing or about to do is a sin. Recognition of the action being a sin itself. Allahu Akbar. This is the first step. How many times do we get involved in actions and we don't realize it's sin, we justify it, we sugarcoat it, and we continue doing the action, not realizing that this is the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So first and foremost, we realize it is a sin. And once we realize it is a sin, we realize, we acknowledge, we set this in our minds that this is the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the decision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether you and I understand it or not, whether you and I understand it or not, whether you and I perceive it to be a sin or not, whether you and I consider it to be evil or not. This is what Sharia says, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is what my Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, said. And this is what we understand. Once we acknowledge it to be a sin, this will help us refrain from this action, even though you and I may desire this action. Number 2, Allama ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions that a person has haya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam mentioned, I frequently quoted this narration. Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam mentions to the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, istahyu min Allahi haqqa al-haya. Have haya and modesty with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sahaba radiallahu anhum asked, O Nabi of Allah, how do we have haya with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We have haya. Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam said, no, it's not that simple. Having haya with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means, and the summary of the statement of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam is that no matter what situation you are in, you are conscious of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. And when you are conscious of this fact, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you, then naturally a person should develop the sense of haya and refrain from any sort of disobedience. Any sort of disobedience. When I'm speaking to the friends and to the students, I always give them an example. And I say, this quality of ihsan is amazing. This quality of ihsan that you recognize or you develop this consciousness that you are seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if that is not possible, then at least realize and remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. And I explain to the kids all the time, I say, when you're driving on the road and you see a sign, red light camera, nobody dares speed. When you see a police, a car, nobody dares break the law in front of that individual. Why? Because there are eyes on this individual. If a person were to develop this conscious mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me, can you imagine the state of you and I? We would all become angels. You would all become angels. Keeping in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you and I. But it is a natural quality of insan that we slip, we make mistakes. So we will get up and we will move forward again. And we will try to develop this quality once again. And we will try to be like the angels. We won't become angels, but we will try to be like the angels. Who are always conscious of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching them. And number 3, Allama ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions that for a person to refrain from sinning and to abstain from sinning is to remember and to reflect over the bounties and the blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed an individual with. How can you and I disobey such a merciful being who has blessed us with so much? If we as humans, as children, we look up to our parents, we realize that our parents have favors upon us. And due to us recognizing the favors of our parents upon us, we can't bear disrespecting our parents, we can't stand anyone else disrespecting our parents. If someone were to insult your father or your mother, instantly you would feel a rage within you. Why? Because you have the sense that these are my parents. They have great favors upon me. I owe them a lot. Allama ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, realize this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has given you anything and everything you have in your life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has blessed you. So realize and remember and reflect upon the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with, and this will keep you distant and afar from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How could it be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses me with these eyes and I use these very same eyes in the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can it be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses me with ears and I'm able to hear, and I use these very same ears in the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How is it possible for a person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me hands and feet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me this functional body. How is it befitting for a believer, for a mu'min to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that has given me all of these blessings, yet that individual, that believer, that mu'min, that person who claims the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses these same blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his disobedience? Allama ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions, I'll summarize again, 3 things. Have some haya with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Realize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. Acknowledge that what you're doing is a sin. Realize that what you're doing is a sin, is an act of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether you and I understand or agree with it or not. This is what Sharia says, and this is what Sharia will say. And number 3, realize, reflect, ponder over the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from sins. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us this quality of sabr and exercise patience with regards to the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had saved Yusuf ala nabiyina alayhi salatu wasalam. Yusuf ala nabiyina alayhi salatu wasalam, despite the challenges piling up and racking up and the situation he was put in, he refrained from this sin. But he reminded you and I, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي, my nafs is not free from sin, it is not bari, it is not innocent. إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ, your nafs, my nafs will encourage me, will encourage you to do sin. It is only through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you and I can be saved from this sin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with His mercy. Jazakumullah wa akhiru da'wana, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. الحمد لله المتكفل بحفظ عبده في جميع موارده ومجاريه، فهو الذي يطعمه ويسقيه ويحفظه من الهلاك ويحميه ويحرسه بالطعام والشراب عما يهلكه ويرديه ويمكنه من القناعة بقليل القوت فيكسر به شهوة النفس التي تعاديه. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدًا عبده ورسوله النبي ونبيه الوجيه، صلى الله عليه وعلى الأبرار من عترته وأقربيه والأخيار من صحابته وتابعيه. أما بعد، فإن أخوف الشهوات شهوة البطن والفرج، فالله أن تغلوا فيهما، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى: كلوا واشربوا ولا تسرفوا إنه لا يحب المسرفين. وقال تبارك وتعالى: إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما إنما يأكلون في بطونهم نارا. وقال تبارك وتعالى: ولا تقربوا الزنا إنه كان فاحشة وساء سبيلا. وقال الله تبارك وتعالى: أتأتون الذكران من العالمين. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: ما تركت بعدي فتنة أضر على الرجال من النساء. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام لعلي رضي الله عنه: يا علي، لا تتبع النظرة فإن لك الأولى وليست لك الآخرة. واعلموا أنه كما يذم الإفراط في هاتين الشهوتين حيث يختل به حقوق الله بالانهماك فيهما، كذلك يذم التفريط فيهما بحيث يفوت به حق النفس أو حق الأهل، كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام: فإن لزوجك عليك حقا، ولزورك عليك حقا، ولجسدك عليك حقا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. والله يريد أن يتوب عليكم ويريد الذين يتبعون الشهوات أن تميلوا ميلا عظيما. بارك الله لي ولكم في القرآن العظيم، ونفعني وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم. أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه، ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله، صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد، فيا أيها الناس، أوصيكم ونفسي أولا بتقوى الله والمواظبة على ذكر الله. ألا خير الكلام كلام الله، وأحسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: من صلى علي صلاة صلى الله عليه بها 10. واعلموا أن الله أمركم بأمر عظيم، فبدأ بنفسه وثنى بملائكة قدسه وثلث بكم أيها المؤمنون، فقال تبارك وتعالى مخبرا وأمرا: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين، خصوصا على الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي، وعلى سائر الصحابة والتابعين رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم انصر من نصر الإسلام والمسلمين واجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خذل الإسلام والمسلمين ولا تجعلنا منهم ولا معهم. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي، يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله تعالى يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم، ولذكر الله تعالى أكبر، والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
سووا صفوفكم فإن تسوية الصفوف من تمام الصلاة. Please make sure that the lines are straight, no gaps in between. Stand shoulder to shoulder. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تلهكم أموالكم ولا أولادكم عن ذكر الله ومن يفعل ذلك فأولئك هم الخاسرون. وأنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي أحدكم الموت فيقول رب لولا أخرتني إلى أجل قريب فأصدق وأكن من الصالحين ولن يؤخر الله نفسا إذا جاء أجلها والله خبير بما تعملون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. اللهم إنا نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. اللهم إنا نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك وغضبك والنار. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من زوال نعمتك وتحول عافيتك وفجاءة نقمتك وجميع سخطك. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلقه سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمته.